You likely know Minnesota's own Kate DiCamillo as one of the most read and best loved children's authors of our time. But did you know that the two-time Newbery Medal winner is also a friend of the library? It's true. Kate's relationship with and affinity for libraries began at an early age when she participated in the summer reading program in Clermont, Florida. As she told public libraries in a recent interview, I couldn't believe I was getting prizes for doing exactly what I wanted to be doing, which was reading. DiCamillo now uses her celebrity to champion the cause of libraries in a host of ways, serving as spokesperson for the nation's largest administrator of summer reading programs, collaborating with industry thought leaders like the American Library Association and Little Free Libraries, and speaking over the years at more public library venues than you can count. Each of our Stand Up for Stand Up Friends honorees today will receive a signed copy of Kate's latest book, The Beatrice Prophecy. Our three Evie Nordley finalist presenters will get the same token of thanks. If you'd like your own copy of The Beatrice Prophecy, see the chat section for a purchase link from our partnering bookseller, Red Balloon Bookshop. Okay, Kate, take it away.
Thank you, Loretta, and thank you, libraries and people who support libraries. So I'm going to talk about the Beatrice Prophecy and about the power of reading, but I'm going to start with my mom. In January of 2009, my 86-year-old mother broke her hip, was operated on for the broken hip, came out of the operation successfully, had a heart attack, and then went into major organ failure. It's just a matter of hours, a doctor told me. Hours like days, I said. Hours like hours, he said. Her system is shutting down. She won't regain consciousness. My brother was in Scotland when all of this happened. There was a direct flight that would get him to Minnesota in just under 24 hours. It was thousands of dollars. There was another much cheaper flight that would get him there in 36 hours. The doctor said, it's just a matter of hours. I told my brother, you're not going to make it here in time either way. There's no point in going into debt for a plane ticket. Besides, she's not conscious. She won't even know that you're here. A nurse overheard my conversation with my brother. She came over to me after I'd hung up the phone and said, you should know that sometimes dying parents will make truly heroic efforts. They hold on so that they can see their kids again. Really? I said. I called my brother back. I told him what the nurse had said. Really? My brother said. We both agreed that our mother wasn't the type of person to delay dying for sentimental reasons. Pardon me. Neither one of us could conceive of her working to stay alive until my brother arrived. He booked the cheaper flight. My mother stayed alive for almost 2 more days. She waited for him. This is the power sometimes granted the dying to choose their moment of leaving. That quote is written in a notebook that I kept with me at the hospital. I don't know who said those words to me. Was it the same nurse who had told me that parents sometimes wait for their children? Was it a doctor, a stranger I had talked to in the hospital hallways? Did I read the words in a book or did I make them up myself? I don't know. All I know is that I wrote the words down. All I know is that my mother exercised the power that had been granted to her. My brother came directly from the airport to the hospital. He sat with my mother and held her hand and told her she looked beautiful because it would have mattered to her to look beautiful. My mother died with my brother sitting beside her bed. It was her last great magic trick, her final upending of our expectations. It was her contrarian self made at this final hour wonderfully, fully manifest. In June of that year, 6 months after my mother died, I went with a couple of writer friends to a cabin in Wisconsin. In a notebook, I wrote the opening lines of the story that I'm here to talk to you about. The story of a girl named Beatrice and a goat called Answelica. The story begins when a gentle monk named Brother Edic finds a lost and feverish Beatrice and says to her, "Whose child are you?" This question, "Whose child are you?" appeared several times in the notes I made on the story. When I got home from the cabin, I started on a rough draft of the first part of the tale of the girl, the goat, and the monk. It was at this point a story about the power of the written word, and a story about remembering and forgetting, a story about grief and love. I did a second draft of the first part, some 50 pages, and then I stopped. I don't know why. I can find no record in any of my notebooks about my decision to put the story aside. All I know is that I printed up the pages of the rough draft and put them away. I returned to a book that I had begun earlier, a book about a squirrel who gets sucked up in a vacuum cleaner and who's transformed into a superhero. As I worked on the superhero squirrel book, I kept thinking, this story would make Betty laugh. Betty, my mother. Betty, who loved to laugh. Betty, who had been in possession of a vacuum cleaner that she had often touted as having near miraculous powers. I forgot entirely about the monk and the girl and the goat. And when I say I forgot, I mean I forgot. It was as if the story had never existed at all. In my 20s, when I was between jobs, I decided to take a train from Florida to Pennsylvania to visit my father. I was on the train for several days. A lot of interesting people sat next to me. One of them was an older gentleman who took his false teeth out of his mouth sometime after midnight. The train was dark and the man held his teeth in his hands and started to work cleaning them with a little pick, digging into crevices, working to extract tiny pieces of food. Sometimes a stray piece would come flying my way and the man would say, apologies, apologies, I do beg your pardon, but these things must be removed. He hummed as he worked. Much later in the trip, an entire family surrounded me, overflowing the seats and occupying, it seemed, the entire train. Young children, aunties, babies, grandmothers, teenagers. I was the one non-family member in their midst. They were happy together. They had brought food and they shared it with me. A mother gave me 2 pieces of fried chicken, and when I ate those 2 pieces quickly, gratefully, I was hungry. I had been existing on peanut butter and saltines. I was gifted with a 3rd piece. Later, after we ate, one of the older women turned to me and said, now, I don't remember. Whose child are you? I shook my head. I couldn't think of how to answer her. It seemed like the most impossible question in the world to answer, and so I said nothing. The old woman took my hand. She squeezed it. That's fine, baby, she said. That's just fine. I was 26 years old. I wanted to be a writer. I had brought a notebook with me. It was spiral bound and filled with pages of empty, blue-lined paper. I took this notebook with me back to the dining car. I sat at a table with a cup of coffee. Most of the time, I looked out the window in a pensive, writerly way. Less frequently, I bent my head to the notebook and wrote. I couldn't believe how hard it was. I couldn't believe how the words fought me, how I fought the words, how this grand castle that I had built in my mind refused to take shape on the paper in front of me. It was terrifying. My last seatmate on the train was a woman my age, a graduate student. She was listening to Sting's album, Dream of the Blue Turtles, on her Walkman. She talked to me about graduate school. I told her that I was a writer. I can't remember the woman's name. She had blonde hair. She let me listen to Sting on her headphones. I could feel the music inside of me. I felt the train inside of me too, its purpose and momentum. I exist. I exist. That was the phrase that went through my head as Sting sang and the train thrummed. I exist. But also, at the same time, I doubted it. I doubted that I existed. What are you writing now? The graduate student asked me. A novel, I said. I'm making pretty good progress. I had written maybe 6 pages in the spiral bound notebook. My father's father was a shoemaker. He wanted my father to be a lawyer or a doctor. My father wanted to be a writer. He became an orthodontist. On the train to see my father with a notebook on the table in front of me, I thought about how my father had never become a writer. I thought about shoemakers, and I thought about shoemakers' elves, those small magical beings who visit while the desperate shoemaker sleeps. The elves work through the night, and in the morning, the shoemaker wakes and finds a beautiful pair of shoes waiting on his workbench. I thought about how much I would love to wake up in the morning and find the pages of my blue-lined notebook filled with a story. The magic of someone else doing the work for me, that is what I wished for. How do you do this? How do you turn words into a story? How does it happen without magic, without elves? That is what I asked myself on the train from Florida to Pennsylvania. I couldn't think of what the answer might be. In the words of the Irish novelist Neil Williams, I could not escape the feeling that folded against my back were wings that had failed to open. When I got off the train in Pennsylvania, I showed my father the notebook. I said, "I'm writing a novel." He said, "Good for you." I said, "It's so hard. I didn't think it would be this hard." He said, "If you want to do something easy, go and do something else. Go work in a factory and screw toothpaste caps onto toothpaste tubes." Later, much later, years after this visit, when I sent my father a finished story, he wrote me a letter that said, "You don't think this is significant, do you?" In an interview in the Paris Review, the novelist Jeanette Winterson says about writing, "The challenge is to continue to do it. Also to remember what I'm here for, no matter how many voices tell me I'm really here for other things or really here for nothing at all." She then goes on to say that there's a fairy story about the prince and the black stones. On top of a crystal mountain is a princess, i.e., the thing of highest worth, the thing desired. The prince, the hero, the questing self, wants to get to the princess, the thing of highest worth. He starts to climb the mountain, which is crystal and therefore extremely slippery and difficult. On the way, he does all right for a bit. Then these black stones in his path start to speak, and they say, "You're a fool. Why are you going up this mountain? You'll never get to the top. In any case, when you get to the top, it won't be worth it. There's nothing there, or you're going to die of thirst. You're going to die of hunger." This continues all the way up. He becomes more and more depressed, and he thinks, "I'll never, never get to the top." Then, of course, eventually the hero does get to the top and frees the princess. He looks back and realizes that the black stones were the souls of all the people who had failed before and therefore who didn't want anyone else to succeed. That's a useful story if you're a writer, because the way is full of black stones. All you know is that there's this thing of highest value, of great worth, that you want to keep trying to achieve every time up the slippery rock with no sense of being able to get there. In the end, Wenderson says, you simply have to stuff your ears and keep climbing. Those wings that Neil Williams speaks of so poignantly, those wings folded against our backs that have failed to open. It is up to us to open them, which is not to say that others can't help us in the unfolding. They can, they do. When I was very young, I felt a different pair of wings folded against my back. I felt the weight of them. I felt their promise of freedom and power. I was desperate for those wings to open. I was 7 years old. I wanted to learn to read. I knew even then that what I needed was words, the words that led to the stories. In first grade in 1971 at Clermont Elementary in Clermont, Florida, we were taught to read with phonics. I could not, for whatever reason, make any sense out of phonics. Every day I came home from school, wretched, desperate. This thing I wanted to read on my own was right before me, but yet it was receding. I told my mother that I didn't understand what was going on. I told her that the letters with the shapes on top of them made no sense to me at all. I want to read, I wailed, and I don't understand. And my mother, with that propensity always for doing what was contradictory, different, said, well, for the love of Pete, work around it then. You're smart. You've got a good memory. Just memorize the words. I'll help you. She made me flashcards, a very thick stack of flashcards, each printed with a single word. She would hold up the word, tell me what it was, and I would repeat it, look at it, memorize it. Every day after school, she and I worked together on the flashcards. Each word I learned felt like a key in my hand. I could feel its hard edges, its particular pattern. I knew that it would unlock something, everything, stories, lighted rooms, the world. I memorized the words my mother held up to me. In this book that I'm here to talk to you about today, in the story of Beatrice and the goat and the monk, it is against the law for females to read and write, to learn to read and write. But Beatrice can read and write. Her mother, her contrary, fierce, brave mother, has assured that she can, has insisted that she be taught. In Beatrice's world, it is against the law for girls to read and write, but there is also this: no one can read. The common person is not taught their letters. It is only men of God and men in power who are literate. When Beatrice becomes friends with a boy named Jack Dory, she is dismayed to find that he does not know how to read. She sets out to teach him. I'm reading now from the book. Each letter has a shape, Beatrice said to Jack Dory, and each letter has a sound. And you put these shapes and sounds together and they become words. Do you understand? He said to her. His heart was beating fast. He did not know. He had not understood how much he wanted it, to know the secret of letters and sounds and words, but his heart, pounding against his rib cage, was telling him. There are 26 letters in all, she said. You will learn each of them, and once you know them, you can mix them as you will, and then use them to form the words of the world and the things of the world. You can write of everything, what is and what was and what might yet be. Jack Dory nodded. The inside of Cannock's tree was snug. There was the smell of beeswax burning, and also, of course, the smell of goat. The bee buzzed around Jack Dory's head. Granny Bibspeak beside him, saying, learn it, my beloved, learn it all. Light of my heart, river of my soul. He watched the letters appear one by one beneath her hand. And he felt as if each letter were a door pushed open inside of him, a door that led to a lighted room. Beatrice leads Jack Dory into the lighted room, just as my mother led me. My father was an excellent photographer. For a time when I was very young, before he left the family, my father was obsessed with taking photographs. He bought an expensive camera. He took pictures of my brother, my mother, me. He turned the images into slides. He gave slideshows. We would all sit together and stare at a blank wall, waiting while the slide projector fan made a humming, busy noise. First, there came a white square on the wall, empty, perfect, bright. And then there was the click of the carousel advancing and the ka-chunk of the slide falling into place. The white square on the wall became a blur of color. My father would focus. The machine made the sound of a tiny engine accelerating, decelerating, accelerating again. And then suddenly, there we were, my mother, me, my brother, French Creek, Sanibel Island, a river, an ocean, my mother's face, my brother's face, my face, the world, us. All those beautiful images, all that light. The first time I finished a story after writing and rewriting and rewriting, working and working to bring the image into focus, I thought, I know this feeling. It was as if I'd been sitting in a darkened room and a square of light had been projected onto the wall. It was as if all the writing and rewriting had been the work of focusing a slide, as if finally something beautiful had been captured. Because I did, in the end, figure out a way to unfold the wings on my back. I learned to do it without the magic of the shoemaker's elves. I learned to do it without my father's approval. I learned to do it by doing it, by stuffing my ears and climbing, by writing draft after draft after draft, working to find the beauty and the light in the words. It is summertime, late summer, August. The cicadas are singing and the angle of the light has changed, and I have set to work on the dreaded, long-delayed task of cleaning the closet in my office. It is 2018. My mother has been dead for 8 years. I've been a writer for 20 years. And in those 20 years, I've written lots of stories. I've done many, many rewrites. The closet in my office is filled with pile upon pile of papers, rough drafts, notes on legal pads, notes on scraps of paper. Look, another rough draft. And here's another one, more notes, more terrible rough drafts. Some rough drafts that became second and third drafts and fourth and fifth ones, and ultimately became stories that worked. It's all here, and it's slow going. At the very bottom of the last pile of papers, I find a story, or the beginning of a story. It's the story of a girl and a goat and a monk. It's the story of a girl who should not be able to read, but can read. I wrote it, but it has been so long since I've seen it or thought about it that it's as if I haven't written it. In the story, Beatrice has forgotten who she is. She can't remember anything, but she dreams of who she was and what has happened to her. In one recurring dream, there's a seahorse falling through the air. The seahorse twists and turns, lit, golden, alive with some meaning that Beatrice cannot fathom, that she does not want to remember. I'm reading now from the Beatrice prophecy. She dreamed. The tutor held something in his hand, curled in his fist. It is for Beatrice, he said. What is it? Shouted her brothers. Let us see, let us see. Tap my hand, the tutor told her. She touched his fingers, and he uncurled them slowly to reveal a strange creature. What is it? She said. A seahorse, he said, a horse of the sea. Does it live? She asked. It is dead, the tutor answered her. She took the seahorse from his hand. It was light, so light that it felt as if she were holding someone else's dream cupped in her hand. She admired the seahorse's curled tail, considered his long nose. She turned him over and saw that he had only one eye. Is he made so? She asked, with only one eye. No, said the tutor. Some trauma happened, I suppose. It's broken, shouted Aesop. I want to hold it, said Rowan. In a moment, said Beatrice. Rowan jostled her elbow and the seahorse fell from her hand. This happened slowly, so slowly that it seemed as if the seahorse floated through the air, twisting and turning, his one eye appearing and then disappearing, winking at her. And then there came a flash of light. A soldier burst into the hall. Seahorse never reached the ground. The dream ended before he could complete his fall. And then it began again. The tutor's closed fist, the tutor's long fingers uncurling to reveal the creature, his voice saying, a seahorse, a horse of the sea. Then came the word dead, and the lightness, the weightlessness of the seahorse in her hand, the creature falling and falling, the soldier bursting in. The dream repeated. It repeated and never changed. The seahorse, it seemed, would never do anything but fall. Beatrice, caught in her fever, captured by her dream, turned from side to side, working to escape. In the 8 years since I had seen the story, in the 8 years since I had written it and put it away, I would sometimes remember that seahorse falling. I would think, where did I read that story of a seahorse falling? Or did I dream it? I don't know. I can't remember. In our brains, there is a small curved formation responsible for the creation of memories. It's called the hippocampus. It's seahorse shaped. Hippocampus is Latin for seahorse. Did I know this when I wrote the story? I don't think so. Maybe it's possible. All I'm certain of is that I sat that August afternoon on the floor of my office in a patch of light, listening to the cicadas sing, and I felt like the cicadas were inside of me. My whole body thrummed. I knew I had found something. I had found a story worth telling, the story I remembered, the story I didn't remember at all, the story buried not only in the closet, but also deep inside of me. Here is a picture my father could have taken, but did not. Here is a photograph that he could have made into a slide, one that would have started as a patch of color on the wall and then slowly come into focus. It is a memory that I've forgotten and not forgotten. Something curled in the seahorse of my brain. I'm young. I'm in the Florida room with my mother. It's autumn. I know this by the slant of light on the floor. I'm sitting with a book spread out before me. It is Pinocchio, a lavishly illustrated Golden Books edition. The art is wonderful, richly colored, deeply imagined. The book is large. I'm laying down, propped up on my elbows. The carpet is warm beneath me. I'm reading aloud to my mother. She is sitting at the glass top table, reading the newspaper, listening to me and not listening to me, both things at the same time. The story of Pinocchio is deep and rich and strange. It's like a dream. And the words are complicated and glorious. And as I read them aloud, I can feel them clicking into place inside of me. I know them. I know them all. That's good, Kate, my mother says at one point, looking up from the newspaper. You're a good reader. My mother does not give idle compliments. Therefore, I am a good reader. Therefore, there are wings on my back, and they are no longer folded. They have unfurled. When I published my first book, my father said to my brother, there's nothing much to it, really. It's not significant. It's not impressive at all. That's what he said. For some reason, my father wanted to destroy that part of me, the part of me that thinks and that tells stories, the part of me that writes. In the Beatrice prophecy, Beatrice, because she can read and write, is in great danger. The king's men are searching for her. The counselor of the king wants to destroy her. When Beatrice remembers who she is, she remembers too a moment in the tower room with her mother. I'm reading again from the book. Her mother was at the spinning wheel, and Beatrice was at her feet, bent over the tutor's book about the king who had been turned into a wolf. She was reading the story to her mother, and her mother was nodding, smiling, spinning. The small room was filled with light. It is very good, Beatrice, said her mother. It is a good story, and you read it wonderfully well. But remember, if someone outside of this house were ever to ask you if you could read or write, you must say that you cannot. You must never admit to what you can do. There may well come a day when things will be different and you can claim your powers. But for now, we must be careful. Do you understand? Yes, Beatrice said, although she had not truly understood. But her mother had understood. Her mother had known. Whose child are you? Brother Edic says to Beatrice in the first draft of the many, many drafts of the story. And what Brother Edic says to Beatrice in the final draft that becomes a book is this: who are your people? Who are your people? Brother Edic asked. They will want to know that you are alive. They will want you home. Whose child are you? The woman said to me on the train. I could not then think how to answer her. I will answer her now. I am the child of a contrary woman. I am the child of a woman who showed me a way around, through, a woman who helped me to memorize the words of the world one by one. I am my mother's child, and this book is dedicated to her. That's the speech. I wonder what the questions are.
Wow. Wow, that was so powerful and just wonderful.
Can I say something, Loretta? Like, you know, I wish that I had put this in there. It's like I talk about it a lot in different places, but, you know, not only did my mother give me that gift of teaching me how to read, but she literally drove like half the neighborhood to the library, the public library, twice a week. We all loaded into the station wagon. And I think about that now because so many kids don't have somebody who will get them there. So
right.
yeah. Okay. All right. I'm ready. I'm ready to do
well,
all.
you know, I just want to say, you know, I've read all your books, and one thing that you were talking about, and I think to me, it always seems like a theme in all of your books, is the beauty and light of words.
Yeah.
And it just feels like that's, you know, in all of the books, I feel that. And I want to thank you for that. And we do have some really good questions too. Some that have just popped up recently on the chat and some that we already have. The first one is related to the Beatrice prophecy, and it's two parts. She says, can you tell us how you got linked with Sophie Blackall to illustrate it? And did you have any say in like the medievally type of illustrations, or was that all her?
Yeah, so you know, typically the way it works, and this is I know that you know this, Loretta, but generally if a book is illustrated that you've written, you as the writer do not have any interactions with the person who is doing the artwork at all. You are purposely kept separate. And also what I have in my contract, and I think it's what most writers have, is what's called rights of refusal as far as who's going to do the work. So you can make a big stink and say, no, I don't want this person. But generally, the publisher working with the design team, the editor, they're the ones who choose who does the illustrations, not me. And I've learned, because Candlewick does such beautiful books, to trust them in that process. But when I turned in this book, I said to my agent, it would be a dream of epic proportions if Sophie Blackall did the art for this. And so that got passed on to Candlewick, and happily they like the idea. But then what happens is that you have to ask Sophie if she wants to do it, and then you have to, if there's time in Sophie's schedule for her to do it. And so it was a miraculous thing when she agreed to do it. And then technically, again, even though I know Sophie a little bit, we didn't get to talk about how she was going to do it or what she was going to do. I just saw the sketches as Sophie came in, as she turned them in. And I didn't say when or how, because there's a line at the end of this book that says, this all happened long ago, or maybe has yet to happen. So it is not technically in any time period. We don't know when it is. But Sophie, working with Chris Paul, decided on this kind of medieval look with a William Morris background, kind of with the design elements. And I just thought it was glorious what she did. And I cannot imagine this book without her art. So it's been just a real gift.
Yeah, they're beautiful. Yeah, it was gorgeous. Somebody asked, we received Beatrice books for our media center. thanks to MILF, and thank you for your generosity to school libraries. We wanted to point that out. Did you have any say in the production of your audiobooks and the choice of voice cast? She's a big fan of those.
Oh, yes. So what happens with when they record an audiobook is that they generally come to me and say, here are the voices that we're thinking of. Which one do you prefer? And sometimes I like say, oh, it's kind of a little bit like when somebody's doing the artwork for the book, I speak up sometimes. And I felt with Beatrice that like it really needed a female voice. And so Tenti, who is the daughter of Judi Dench, just seemed absolutely perfect for this audiobook. And you know, audiobooks are just they're so, it's so amazing to me that you can, you know, it's like go to your library, check out the audiobook, because I hear from so many families who take them on, you know, long trips in the car. And it's just like what a gift it is to hear a story all together when you're all in the car. I mean, the magic of that, you know, it's just, it's, I think it's profound. So
it is. Another person said, I love the feminist undertones in the Beatrice prophecy, particularly as seen in Answelica and Beatrice. Was this something you intended going into the writing of it?
Yeah, absolutely not. And it was like, and I never know what I'm doing. And then it was like I could start to see it out of the corner of my eye. And you know, kind of like, and this is true with all the thematic elements for me. It's like I became aware, like by the time I was like maybe in like the next to last draft of it, it's like, oh, this is going on. There are all these feminist elements, but I never, it's the same as I didn't fully understand how much this book had to do with my mother until I was done with it and started to think about the, and the fact that my father wanted to suppress that part of me, the thinking part of me, the writing part of me, and none of that was I aware of, but it all ends up in the book and makes the, you know, it connects to the themes that are unwittingly there. I tell this story quite a bit, but I'll tell it very quickly now that I remember the very first time I went and did a school visit. It was when my first book had been published. It was Because of Winn-Dixie. I was so excited to do a school visit. I stood in front of this fourth grade classroom, and the kids were all looking at me, and the teacher said, here's the person who wrote the book, and now we're going to talk about the themes in this book. And I thought, oh no. I mean, I could feel like literally like a trickle of sweat go down the side of my body, because I thought, what are the themes? I have no idea what the themes are. And mercifully, the kids working with the teacher, they shouted out the themes. She wrote them down on the board, and then I went out to the car and I memorized them, and so I could use them for the next school visit. And that's when I became aware about that thing where you're kind of writing behind your own back a lot of the time, and you don't know what's going on. Okay, all right, I'll be quiet and I'll read it.
Well, that's a good segue actually to the next question.
Oh, good.
Which of your works of fiction feels most autobiographical? Or if it's easier to answer, which books feels most personal? And
yeah, every book feels super personal, and I can find myself in virtually every character in every book. But the first time I was really aware of kind of like just putting myself directly on the page was with a book called Raimi Nightingale, which is the story of a girl named Raimi Clark whose father leaves the family, and you know, I had been telling the story of missing parents for a long time, and my father left when I was young, but I was looking at it indirectly. And in that book, I looked at it directly and really kind of revealed myself. And also really that Raimi was so much the kid that I was when I was growing up, that kind of watchful, worried, hopeful kind of kid. And so that's probably the most that I've, but every book is personal. And then like unwittingly, the Beatrice Prophecy is probably one of the most personal books that I've written. So.
Okay, that's good. If Beatrice Prophecy sees a screen adaptation, which we all hope it does, who would be your dream casting for Beatrice, Jack Dory, and Edic? She said, I just watched Flora and Ulysses, and can actually picture Matilda Lawler as Beatrice.
Oh, it's so funny as I'm listening to the question. It's like Matilda will be too old, and Matilda is my number one choice. I mean, Matilda is unbelievable that she has, it's so much gravitas and certainty. Yeah. So that, yeah, I and who knows by the time, this gets, I believe it will happen, that it will get turned into a movie, but I don't know who the child actors will be by then. But yeah, Matilda would have been my first choice. But it's fun to think about who would be Brother Edic. Patrick Stewart. Yeah. But it's fun to play those games in your head. Yeah,
it is. Another one wants to know, have you discovered that you have any famous fans, folks who admire your work that you're floored that knows your name? Wow. That makes me kind of like jumpy to even consider. I mean, it's happened a couple times, but probably the most moving time for me was when I was on an airplane. This is a long time ago. And it wasn't somebody famous. It was just the boy sitting next to me in the middle seat. He was reading Because of Winn-Dixie. And that to me felt like the biggest thrill imaginable. And I wrestled with myself as whether I should say something or not. And I did finally tell him. I was like, I wrote that book. And this is what he said to me, this self-possessed 10 or 11-year-old. No, you didn't. I said, what? He said, no, that can't be. And then I went so far as to show him my driver's license, but my driver's license has my full name on it, which is Katrina as opposed to Kate. So he never did believe me. But there was something just so thrilling about this child just out in the world holding and reading this book that I had written that just moved me so much. So, yeah. So what do you find to be the most difficult and most rewarding aspects of your career as a writer? The word career is just always amazing to think about. I mean, I just because there is still a part of me that I seriously cannot believe it's all happened. When I started writing, I was working in a book warehouse in downtown Minneapolis called the Bookman, and I was picking books, filling orders, and it gave me a really good idea for what to expect when you published a novel, which was absolutely nothing would happen. So there's part of me that still can't believe that what has happened to me has happened. So the hardest things and the best things, the hardest thing, I guess, is probably the doubt, because it never goes away. It's always that thing of, can I do this? Can I make this story work? Am I doing it right? Is it, does it matter? That never goes away. And then the best thing is, a kid writing a letter saying, I hated to read, and I read this book, and now I love to read. It never fails to move me. It's such a privilege to do this and to be a part of the magic that ushered me into this world.
those books that held me are now hopefully, holding other kids, and it's I never get over the gift of that.
Do you ever worry that you'll run out of story ideas yourself,
Um,
do you just have a fountain of ideas that are always there to draw on?
I have I've learned to trust the universe, and it's actually a question that kids will ask a lot. Are you gonna run out of ideas? And
Mhm.
I always say to them, have you been on any method of public transportation lately?
Mhm.
Because if you get on a bus with a notebook in your hand and you really sit there and watch people and listen to them and be with them, you realize that there are more stories in the world than there will ever be time to tell. So yeah.
True. What are some of what authors are you reading yourself right now?
I just finished a great book called The Lucky Ones, and it's a middle grade novel
Mhm.
by, her name is Linda, and then there's a middle name Jackson. I can't remember the middle name, but she'll
Yeah.
forgive me for that. But it was fantastic. Takes place in Mississippi in the 1960s, and it's just it was really thought provoking and deeply moving, and I loved it. And the picture book that I cannot get over these days is by our friend Sophie Blackle, Farmhouse. So if y'all haven't seen that book, it is a wonder of it's about a farmhouse and the 12 kids that grew up in it, and it will make you want to write a book. It will make you want to share the book with somebody else, or tell the story of what it was like for your grandparents, or it is just a marvel. And then for me as an adult, what am I reading? I've got a wonderful galley of a book called The Sun Walks Down. So I don't think it's out yet, but I recommend it wholeheartedly. When you see it come up, The Sun Walks Down, Fiona something. Yeah.
And someone wants to know, do you work on one project at a time or tend to jump around?
Yeah, I love that question because it gets to process, and which is always fascinating to me. And because when I finally started writing, I found that what worked for me was to move slowly. And so I do like 2 pages a day. And so I will do multiple drafts of the thing. So I'll, like, if I have a shorter project, I'll take it all the way through the first or second draft. I'll put it aside, let it sit for what I think is a minimum of 2 weeks. I try to leave it alone for that long. And in the meantime, I'll pick up another thing that is in second draft or third draft or fourth draft and take it up another draft. So I don't work on them within the same time period, but I have lots of projects going at the same time. I just return to them kind of in a pattern. And, that's great because Loretta, I know that you know this too. It's just like the good thing about moving from project to project is there's always that point where you think this is never going to work with whatever you're working on. And it's like, you take it as far as you can, you put it away. And then when you come back to it, it makes, you think, oh yeah, okay, I can work with this and this is what I'll do. You see it more clearly because of the time away from it.
Right, fresh eyes.
Mhm.
What do you think of virtual versus in-person events now that you've done both of those?
Yeah, not a lot of in-person events lately, but I was surprised when the world shut down and we started doing the virtual things. What kind of amazed me was that you could still have that feeling, even though I couldn't see the people that I was talking to, I could still feel connected to them through, like just reading to them and through doing Q&A. And so I've been amazed that I can still feel that connection, because that's what I loved so much about being in front of people and talking with people at book signings and
Right.
doing lectures and events, was just that you get that feeling of community, and I'm amazed that that can still happen here. And I don't know if y'all have felt it. I I felt it today. I felt y'all listening to me, and it matters.
So I know a lot of people, a lot of writers during the pandemic, their writing habits changed. Did your writing habits change at all during the pandemic, or how did it affect you?
Yeah, you know, in the old days, what my life was a good portion of it was travel and promotion. And, you know, I only wrote when I was at home. And so all of a sudden here I was at home all the time. So I wrote more than I had in a long time. And I also, I added more sessions than I would normally do. And I I was so grateful that I could write, because it was like a centering thing. And you know, you know how we all felt. It was utter panic and despair, and you're worried. And to be able to anchor myself with a story was just a real gift.
Yeah, it seems like it might be a good distraction.
Right.
On everything that was going
And
on.
again, you know, even it's like, talk about virtual, it is virtual when I'm doing that, because it's so long before it goes into people's hands, but yet you feel connected when you're telling a story. So
Someone wants to know, how did the idea for Minnesota opera treatment of Edward Tulane come about? It feels like such an unexpected but not unwelcome pairing.
right, you know, a rabbit opera, it's not what
Right.
comes to mind for everybody right away. And you know, the funny thing about that is that I mean, I'm not given to grandiose thoughts, but I remember when Edward Tulane was published, and I was with an old professor of mine from the University of Florida. I met up with him in Chicago, and he was talking about he said he was talking about Edward, and he said, it's just so many big emotions. He said, it's kind of operatic. And I said, you know, I've just kind of always had this like feeling that maybe it could be turned into an opera. And then we both laughed. And yet it happened. And
Wow.
and it's just like, and so, you know, the Minnesota Opera came to contacted my agent and said, we want to do this. And so it's going to be a thrilling I haven't seen a dress rehearsal, but I've gone and seen the costumes and the stage settings, and it's just going to be, you know, forgive me, miraculous. Yeah.
Someone else wants to know, do you have a favorite band or playlist you listen to while writing?
Ooh, that's another question that I love that doesn't get asked a lot. Yeah, what I generally do is I find a piece of music that oh, that's it, that's what I need to listen to. And then every time I sit down to write a particular story or a particular novel, I play that again and again and again. Like we were just talking about Edward Tulane, that got written to Rachmaninoff's vocalese being played over and over and over again. And that's generally the way it is. I find something, a piece of music that ushers me into the story, kind of.
And Dawn would like to know what you're working on now, if you're in a position to share that.
Yeah, well, that takes us back to the pandemic. So part of, you know, what I was working on, the first of those will come out. It's a trilogy of fairy tales, fairy tale novellas, kind of, and the first will come out next year. And I'm also working on a novel. I just finished rewrites of a novel, and I think I've got an idea for another novel. So yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah,
we'll see. Look forward to that. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll see.
Yes. Did you get to do anything special for the recent anniversary of Winn-Dixie?
Oh yeah, that was great, because I got to Anne, I have become friends with Anne Patchett, who is a wonderful writer of books for adults. And Anne did an introduction to the 20th anniversary edition. And so that was a great thing. And it's still like that whole thing of it being 20 years old, when now it's 22 years old, just still it's there's that element of disbelief for me. So it's just like 20 years, and the thing that really puts it into place, and it's just like it's happening more and more, is like when I do interviews, and if it's somebody who's like young and starting out, they will say to me, I read this book, I read Winn-Dixie when I was a kid, and I remember my teacher reading it in 3rd grade. I remember my librarian reading it to me when and after school stuff. And it's just like, it's so amazing to me to think that of these adults who are now out there running the world, and they've read Winn-Dixie. So
Well, that is amazing. I think it's time to
to make me be quiet. Can I say thank you to
Oh,
everybody who's
yes.
a friend of the library, and because that means that what you are is a friend of the kids who need those books, and the kids who need the stories in those books. That's basically what you're doing, is you're making sure that kids like the kid I was can go out into the world and be who they're supposed to be. So thank you for.
Oh, and thank you so much for being so generous with your time. I do want to mention that Kate's speaking today. She did it we were to buy copies of books to distribute to kids in libraries, and so we really thank you for that, for being so generous. And
oh, thank you for doing that. Thank you. And I'm just deeply appreciative. So Loretta, you did a good job.
you did great. Thank you so much. Bye.